the strategy that I'm attempting to teach and to begin to work with in this fall series is what's in your genealogy toolbox? What are the strategies and what are the various kinds of tools that you use to ensure that you take your family history a little further or a lot further in your life? It's very important that you continuously learn new general history, for example, that you know some things about particular areas so that you are able to include that. Otherwise, what you're doing is passing on names and dates and a few places to people, and they will kind of get it, but maybe not until they're in their 50s or 60s, and they'll still be looking for those valuable stories and that context that means so much. So today we're going to talk about timely context within timelines. And I know many of you are just like other people saying, well, I really meant to do a timeline, Jan, but I just haven't gotten started yet. I'm going to encourage you again to get started, no matter what kind of system that you are using, whether you're using some kind of an electronic database or whether you are just using paper pencil, but it is going to give so much to you and add so much to your life if you have that timeline. When you make a timeline, you're making a template for your family story. Think about that, because timelines are going to take you beyond just the basic facts, those birth, marriage, and death records. You know, those things are absolutely necessary, but they're just a start. Getting that neat baptismal record is beautiful, but it's just a start. What about the ceremony for that baptism? Was it before church? Was it after? Was it someone who came to the house out at the farm? You can add context, and it does mean a lot. It's going to help you learn about those past generations, and it's going to make it easy for you to remember those past generations and pass on information that's very important. Timelines are chronological outlines and a way to keep inserting new info. As you know, I use Word, I've used Google products, used whatever to make them. There isn't any magic, but I like being able to use something on a computer so that I can insert stuff before an event and after an event, and I can just keep spreading out my timeline for a particular family. I find that that way I can do an entire family unit, maybe mom and dad and you or your ancestor and all the siblings, etc., and continue the timeline through time. That way the data is all available in one document, and it's great for research trips. I've talked before about going to Norway, going up to Canada, going back to Washington, D.C., only with my timelines, not with other things, having it prepared with questions inside of my timeline so that I've got it all in one great notebook, one great place, and I know it's going to be understandable for others, and I've got a great place to take my notes about the questions I already asked. Of course, we all know about their very best successful search strategy inside of genealogy, and that is learning to search backward from where you are. Learning to go from what you know today in backward steps to the stuff you want to find. There's nothing worse than having somebody come into the library and say, you know, I have a couple of hours today. Can you show me my relationship to Benjamin Franklin? I know he's somewhere in my history. Or I know we were related to President Wilson, but I'm not sure how. Can we find that today? It's pretty difficult, as you know, to do that. We can teach people how to go back in incremental steps, the stuff you want to find. So with using official records, so you know you don't get off track. And a tool that many of us use, for example, would be a 6 or a 5 generation chart. And there are various kinds of those today. By the way, stop into the library because we've got lots of different things. Being able to work with step families using a 6 generation chart, being able to work with adoptees, and so on. You can begin recording information about yourself and your immediate family because that's the context you know best. And so you might use family group sheets, or you might write paragraphs, or you might use something like an electronic database like Roots Magic, or a couple of others that I'm going to mention a little later on. You're going to record births with an exact date and with the exact local place, the county, the state, and the nation for all of these types of records, because that's going to help you find the next things, the next items that you want to find. Remember, lots of things are found at the county level. I'm going to intrigue you a little bit right now and tell you that I've discovered that that is not necessarily true with the state of Connecticut. We'll talk about that in a while. One of the best things you can do for yourself is record everyone who was in a household during each decennial U.S. Census. That's every 10 years. They start in the United States in 1790. They go forward right now through 2020. They're important data points, and the things are available to you to look at beginning in 1790 through 1950. After that, we have those important things in the neighborhood, like essential school censuses done every year, at least until somewhere around the year 2000 in almost all the communities in the United States. You just have to know where at the county to go get that information. You can record, which I'm going to really encourage you to do today and show you some places to get these important, memorable dates in your life and things that happened. I will never forget the day that Mount St. Helens erupted. I attempted to go to work, had my boss phone me and say, don't go to work. The sky is full of stuff, and we don't know what it will do to a car engine. And so I didn't go to work. Wow. My timeline from when I was a high school grad back to my birth, I'm going to show you this real quick just as a backward strategy. Start down here at the bottom if we're going to go backwards. I was a Polson High School graduate in May of 1964, going to MSU at Missoula. I was going to major in English, and I did. But I also that summer had a very memorable event. Montana flooded. And I happened to be in Glacier Park working, and all of us who were workers at APGAR were stranded for 2 weeks. I can't face drinking high C fruit juice anymore because that's all we had to drink because the water was not potable for us. So in August 1960, moving back, just looking at it, I started high school at Polson High School, having just moved there the week before school started. And just right before that, 8 months before that, pardon me, in January, I had moved to Billings, Montana, and I was in a huge junior high for 6 months. And it was a real moment of impact for me because I came from a school with about 29 students in it. I had been in a country school beginning in 1952 when I was a first grader out at Ferndale School in Lake County, Montana. In 52, Ike was elected US president, but before he was, there was a tour. I'm not sure if I was in Kalispell or in Missoula or where, but I know my dad held me on his shoulder so I could see Ike in a parade, and Ike was in a convertible. That's all I remember about it, but I do remember that. Well, my first census that I was in was the 1950 US Census in April in Ferndale, Flathead County, Montana. There's my mom, well, my dad, Byron, mom, Inez, my oldest brother, Con, who was 13. My brother, Gary, was 11. Mike was 9. My sister, Mary, really, we called her Susie, was 7. And I was 4. And for most of the family, for Gary, Mike, Mary, and Janet, that's the first census that they appeared in. Con was in a census before that. He was in the 1940. May 21, 1946, well, I was born in Kalispell, Montana. My home was at Ferndale. Here's a neat fact for you. My grandparents both sets lived within a block of me, and they were in two different counties. It had impacts on my research, I tell you. Going backwards, if I was going to find out more about my Lee family, until 20 some years ago, I didn't even know that my grandmother's maiden name was Coglizer. So I had not been acquainted with the 26 different variations in naming that her family has. If I go backwards in the 1940 census, I see my grandma and grandpa Oscar and Mary Lee living in Ferndale. They'd only been there 2 years because they'd retired up there. In 1930, they were in their own little community called Oscar after my grandpa. He had a post office in his ranch house out in Hill County, Montana, 14 miles from Havre. In the 1920 census, the family was actually in Havre for a little while, just during the time that the census was being taken. Oh, and by the way, that 1930 census, the biggest thrill for me was seeing that my grandpa Oscar took the census. He was the census taker. April 9 of 1912, my mom was born. I just had to get her into the timeline somehow, but I know, she's actually over in a Beck timeline going backward with her parents, Engvald and Ella May. And May 2, 1911, my dad was born at their ranch, Crown Hill Ranch near Havre. And he was born under the name of Eskew in 1911, and his dad officially Grandpa Oscar changed his surname to Lee in 1912. So I have the unique opportunity to see crossouts on my dad's birth certificate as we record the change in names. And boy, did that ever help so that I could find the records later on. So that's what it's like going backward. When we talk about going backward, you do it in a precise way, step by step, beginning with you, so that you are very sure of the information. I realize many of us get information from our families who have done this research previously. And all I can tell you is, yes, trust it to a certain point, but you still need to verify that. And you still need to take that thing that they have done up to date to you so that you have continued the backward strategy. Here are some of my 20th and 21st century impacts because I've lived in both centuries. Just looking at it, John F. Kennedy was elected in 1960, and he was assassinated in 63 during my senior year. And I was one of the editors of the high school newspaper, and I got to write an article about it. It was very brief. My grandma and grandpa Lee's deaths and my grandpa Beck's death, they were big impacts for me because I got to know them so well with them living so close to us. The 59 Montana earthquake, I was 13 and a half. I had my first job up at the Kelly and Evans Summer Estate. I was with my mom. We felt that thing. I was scared to death. I slid from our tiny bathroom on linoleum floors into the bedroom, and we wondered what was happening. And most everybody up there was outside all night because we were afraid of the stones falling even more from things that had come out of chimneys, etc. My parent deaths were, of course, a big impact, and they will be for you too. I've mentioned Mount St. Helens. September 11, I was in Canada. I was scared to death for my kid. My husband and I did not get back for almost a week because you could not come back over the border. And so we were with some very sympathetic Canadian people who also cried for everything that was happening. And of course, the 2020 COVID thing, I was numb. The one thing I do know is that I missed contact with all of you and the library. And so I started my Zoom presentations Wednesdays at 11 as a way to get in touch with friends. And by golly, we're continuing it. And it's been good. We used to do it once a week. Now we do it once every 2 weeks or so. The next one's going to be 3 weeks or so because of things that we have going on. So that's just a little pre-announcement here. you need to think of, and you can begin jotting down right now, because everybody puts on an interested face when they see a presentation, but it doesn't mean they're paying attention. So you can write down your 20th and 21st century felt impacts for yourself. Jot them down in your notes. What events have impacted you or impacted your family? Have family members been in wars? Were they in some kind of bad weather? Were they in a firestorm, like the poor people down in Paradise, California? And I had Ferndale people who were in that Paradise fire that I found out about later on. And the family cottage that they'd had for so long, of course, is totally gone. How did COVID impact you? What impacts have been felt by older family members such that they keep relating stories about these to you? Because those felt impacts about events are important in your story, and your story is incomplete without them. Sometimes you're going to have to look back. I'm going to give you some suggestions right now. You can do big things like if you know your relative was alive in 1906, for sure they saw information and heard information for days and days about the California San Francisco earthquake. Presidential elections were at least big, at least right around the time in terms of who got elected and what was going on. Maybe you were in North Dakota in the 1870s, 1880s, and experienced what we call the big blizzard, where so many children died on their way home. They did not have time. It was clear when they left their schools, and suddenly the blizzard descended and many children died. Uh, you are going to be able to find these felt impacts, record them. When you do them first in an outline, then you can begin to find out more and write them into your story, and you get that comfort level. On the other hand, if you never get to your story, if you have the outline, your family will know. My biggest thing with timelines is that it enables you to quit searching back and forth in binders and folders for a piece of information. Maybe you keep carrying those death certificates, birth certificates, marriage certificates around, or other things that you've got, and it's really neat to be able to look at them. But if you're carrying those everywhere so that you can look at them as you're trying to find another piece of information, you are not wasting your time, but you're missing the best use of your time. If you have those in a timeline, you know you already have them. You can look then, because your timeline's going to be a springboard for you to more questions to see what you want to find next. You need to record what you find and ponder those desired facts and write new questions. Right? What I've found is every single time I find a new piece of information, I find I have more questions than I had before. I hope that's how it is for you, because it makes for a very exciting genealogy search. Get more than birth, marriage, and death is what I'm saying. And for your convenience, have one place in a timeline. Extend those facts across family members and friends. You're going to be surprised even when you're doing it, if you're doing something and you even have that timeline on your phone. You can scroll faster through a timeline than you can through each person's piece of information. Believe me, it will really help you. Make a plan. This is important. In that timeline, you can make a plan to look for the next records you need, keep yourself on track, and look for new finds. Of course, put the surname variations that you've got in your family right at the top. I have 26 of them for that Cogleiser family. And it helps now because I could just pull that timeline out and say, okay, before I leave this region that I'm researching in Kentucky, I need to just look for those 3 Cogleiser names that begin with a K, because that's the era that they were in. It'll get you to know the information really well. You want to get the maiden names if you can get them, the dates and the places of baptisms and sponsors and the siblings, marriages, deaths, the moves made in approximate dates. Those are just so important for you. Notice what I did in my history with me. I recorded those 3 moves, well, 2 moves actually, made in 1960 with me, moving out of my little community of Ferndale, where I'd been very secure in a little country school, moving to Billings, Montana, and riding a school bus for the first time, scared to death, all 79 pounds of me, and then moving to Polson in the fall, back to a more manageable situation, but I still had 70 people in my class. So that was way bigger than what I'd been in Ferndale. And of course, those national and local events of impact. There are strategies for you to analyze that timeline. Once you've got something in there in the timeline, you can begin to say, I don't know how my ancestor felt about a particular impact with the San Francisco earthquake, but by golly, I can look in the Bow Bells newspaper in North Dakota, courtesy of newspapers.com. I can look in the Kalispell Flathead newspapers for the same era, and I can find man on the street little observations from people saying what they felt it was like. I can intertwine those into my family story just by taking that information down. And if nothing else, writing a summary paragraph, maybe daring to quote just one or two of those people so you don't put too many quotes in there because you don't want to do the entire story, but giving people an idea of what people thought of that time. You write your questions into your timeline. And if you notice under number 3 here, record, I've said you cross out your note just with one line, please, when you have answered it. Because guess what? A year from now, you'll say, did I ever find that? Did I ever do that particular thing? You can look back in your timeline. Like I wanted to know in May of 1980, when we got the big blast of St. Helens, the eruption, I wanted to know what was going on with my brothers. I had 2 brothers. I had Mike and Con living out just 60 miles from there. And guess what? We couldn't phone. There were crackles in the phone, and that was about it. And no, we didn't have cell phones then. So you've discovered family in a step backward. You're going to have to record all of them. Don't think you're going to do this later. That's why it's so convenient to capture all the people in a census who are in the household, because you can always go back then and look at that census really quickly in your timeline. You're not looking for that piece of paper where you saved the entire neat looking census and said, this is really cool. I'll put it in my 3-ring binder. But then you have to go look for that. If you record the names and what you think is important at that point in your timeline, by golly, you've got it in your notes. Maybe you find out that somebody's absent and they shouldn't be. Maybe it's somebody who should have been 11 years old because they were 1-year-old in the previous census. Did they die? It's something for you to investigate. If you prove or disprove family lore, write a brief note in the timeline. Yes, you can include your family stories. You should. In fact, you can start out with them and say, my Aunt Louise said, blah, blah, blah. I will warn you. A relative wanted me to undo my cross out in my timeline that I gave her for Christmas after I shared that a family story was not true. And I had to say, well, why don't you write your version and send it to me, and I will include it with Susie Says in there. So that's how I took care of it. But she was adamant. She wanted me to undo my cross out and say, no, this really is true. This is the family story. So be aware that as you share these things, you'll get varying opinions. Isn't it interesting that we can all grow up in the same family, in the same community at the same time, and have such different stories about a particular Christmas event or a Halloween event or something like that? But that gives you the opportunity to write what they believed too. You always go backward in careful increments and use wherever possible those proven events and put down where you got them from. Today, I gave you a practice outline that you can use where somebody else had started an outline on a person. And what I've done is I've put a few things in, but none of the national events. If you want to, you could go look at that 1.5-page outline, and you may choose to go in and say, okay, I could find some of these events for this particular person. Timelines then keep you oriented and they prevent clutter. Lots and lots of clutter. My timelines contain next questions, observations. They remind me what's been answered. I have so many notes on them that I playfully call them my dirty timelines, not because they contain dirty information, but because a timeline for me needs to be a worksheet. It's in constant revision or addition. Your data examination techniques. What family lore? Did you put some of it in? If you say, nah, that story was just so wild that it can't be true, so I won't include it. Believe me, the first time you show your timeline or your story to your family, they want that in there. I've got a book from Southern Missoula County where my cousin insisted still in the timeline in his story on saying that we were related to King William of Orange. We're not. He had the information. Cousin Monty had it, but he said, no, I really think that. And, you know, and our great grandpa said that. And I said, yeah, his name, my nickname for him was Liar, Liar, Pants on Fire. He lied about everything. What kind of evidence might be available? Think about it. You want to get primary documents where you can, or indirect information. Maybe you can't get a naturalization, but you can indirectly infer that that person was naturalized from the article in the newspaper in which they said that Harriet Armstrong was naturalized last week. She was from England and is now a proud US citizen or something like that. Be aware of the historical context of all those interesting times that your ancestors were witness to. You have family that goes back 4 generations already, 3 or 4 generations, that was involved in this big thing called the Great Depression. We allude to things, you know, that they saved everything, that they did everything, that nothing was, you know, that a ball of string was saved because you could need to use that. But what have you done to record those times? Get the additional censuses of your relatives and your close neighbors. Always, when you're looking at a census, check at least 1 page back and 1 page forward. You never know what you might find. You might find more family. Remember that the census is recorded in the order of households. It is not recorded in alpha order. So you're going to see the neighborhood when you look there. You're going to see the neighbors on either side of your family so that you get an idea about who could possibly be in the fan club. That is, unless they took a shotgun to one another. No unique census information that you can look for. What are the years that land ownership is inferred? What are the years, like 1900, when it told how many years a particular couple had been married, or how many times they had been married individually, or the immigration dates, or their occupations, or their languages they were using. Look at the historical event impacts, and you have to do that separately. You are going to have to go to nice books that we saw right before this presentation started, where one of our participants could show us important dates in history from a couple of different sources. There's lots of them out there, so you're going to be amazed. Today, one of the things you can look for that's really interesting to see is the impact of wildland forest fires across the United States and how it's impacting the whole communities. And do they choose to stay? Do they choose to go? And what about the latest floods? What's happening there? You'll see families say, we're going to stay and we'll rebuild, or nope, this is the 3rd time for me and I'm gone. Look for other helpful information that can help you. You can go look probably in your county, if you know where the county is, at the kind of taxes that your family paid, their voter registrations, whatever. If they were aliens in 1940, remember, they had to go register at the post office, and that information was taken to Washington, D.C., and it was quite a questionnaire. look for ways in which to, in that timeline, put in their business or what they were doing. Or if you can't find anything, you need to make a comment about that there's a paucity of information about this particular person. I had one aunt who said, the only time she ever wanted to be in there was when she was born and when she married and when she died. She thought that would be a pretty good thing. In Havre, Montana, I found her getting a traffic ticket. It was pretty neat. If your person is being elusive, think of where they might have been in the community and read those newspapers, read between the lines, figure things out. One of my niece's most wonderful memories of her mom, Susie, is that I managed to find her mom getting a ticket in Polson, Montana for no motorcycle helmet. Isn't that great? Did the person help plat the town site? Did they move in immediately afterwards and buy a place? Did they homestead? If they owned a business, it's really neat to be able to find it in a city or county directory. But how about finding it on a fire map? Because they exist and they're available now, and pretty easy for us to be able to find. Did some of those people write about or refer to a particular area of town or city in letters to other relatives? Do you have sets of letters? Wow. You don't have to include the whole letter, but you might include some points or some things or talk about what they did in that letter. I'm in favor of actually doing the actual letters. I have all of my husband's letters when he was in Vietnam. I have all of them that he wrote home because his mom saved them. What a thoughtful thing to do. Were they active in a church? Or did she belong to some kind of a book club or to a ladies' aid society? Did she get a book from a local library? Because sometimes you'll even be able to see those if they're long enough ago. I know in our library, you can come in and see who checked out books when the library first started as a city library in 1910. Wouldn't that be cool? Be proactive and reflect about whether your timeline is really helping you. You need to go back and consult it frequently and use it for your notes and, draw those stars, make those lines connect to other things and say, this is what you want to find out, and get into using it in a meaningful context. It should guide your search for more information. It should show you whether or not you're really going backward in a stepwise progression. That's important. If you're missing sometimes, or you say, well, I haven't been able to find anything in this 40-year era, so I don't know. I just skipped it. No, use the newspaper to find out what was happening in that community during that time. Write a brief paragraph. Doesn't have to be a big thing, but if you want your work to be meaningful for your family, you need to do that. Did you find the important events for the time period? Did you scribble helpful notes and your immediate reactions and what you found out later on? I'm always confused when I come to my notes and I say, huh? And I have some huhs in there. Personally, I use Roots Magic as a personal database, and I'm going to show you why. It's inexpensive. There's several others that I'll mention here. It keeps my data private. I don't go out online and put my particular ancestry out at Ancestry or other places. That's my choice. There's going to be a day when I no longer subscribe to any of those. And when I don't, my records are going to be inaccessible to me or to someone later unless they pay again. So I only use those commercial databases for the very best thing that they are famous for, and that is giving us great impact information from various kinds of records. They've just about gone through what I call the low-hanging fruit. That is the marriages, the deaths, the births in most states. They're available someplace usually, or they will point you in a direction so that you can be able to get that information. They've done wills. They've done probates. They've done various kinds of information that are neat to find. I utilize those, but I don't put my records out online. And I especially do not share pictures or documents like a one-of-a-kind local baptismal certificate that was put out just by that Lutheran minister only, hand-drawn. I'm not going to put that out there. I want to know that I still own that and I pass that on. And ownership gets pretty fuzzy when you're looking at commercial operations. That's all I'll say about that. Here's my grandpa. Here's my Roots Magic 10 file in a timeline for him if I only wanted to do that. Here's what he looks like from his birth early on. And he immigrates at the age of 14 months on 1 June in 1881. He appears in all of these censuses, and I found him in a confirmation record, and I found his homestead in Canada. He also has a homestead in North Dakota. It was harder to find. I found where he lost his property and sold some property to his mom, his marriage, his residences, and so on. It would go on for several pages. This is just the first part of it, but I can look into Roots Magic and see that anytime, and I can cut and paste that to a piece of paper for a person to say, this is what I've got. The little pen tip over at the right side indicates that I have proof for all of those things. It's the actual proven documents. And down here, the declaration of intention at the age of 34 on 26 September 1914 in Burke County. I had to write about that because my grandpa, who had gotten his citizenship, remember, he was from Norway, got his citizenship from his dad when his dad was naturalized. My grandpa went up to Canada and got a homestead and gave up his U.S. citizenship when he did that, and then found out later on, oh, the war is probably going to come, and I need to prove I'm not an alien. So we had to start the process all over. You find neat stuff. Here's my grandma, my great grandma, Annie Caroline Quist. And there she is. I was able to find her in lots of censuses, lots of residences, lots of whatevers in there. And that was very meaningful to me because she died about a year before I was born. And she always visited people. So guess what? I would have been visited. My sister and my brothers got visited in Ferndale by her, but I didn't. So it's pretty neat to see it all in one. Now, if somebody says, what do you have for this person? I not only have this particular thing in my Roots Magic 10 file, but I have a separate file on the quests in which this information is recorded along with all of the other quests, because that's my particular timeline that I take to research with. And it's about 30 pages long. It's real manageable. I just have it. Used to have it in a 3-ring binder. Now I just have bound it locally and carry it because it's a lot lighter than a 3-ring binder, or at least the binders I carry. So what's in your toolbox? I hope you utilize event and place-centered timelines to jump into the context, collect those, make your own timeline for an ancestor. And if you're paper-based, it's even more important than ever that along with your 6th-generation charts and your family group sheets, et cetera, that you have that timeline. But it's just a very important thing. Get a clue. Find these topical timelines in your research as a means to learn about your ancestor's life, because you know what? Every day in the news, stuff happens. And some of it really means a lot. There are spectacular moments in our lives where we just don't forget what we were doing or where we were on a certain day. So some examples of topical timelines might include, I love this for the state history, state and county history. When you want to find state and county histories, the easiest place for me that I can tell you about is the Newberry Library. I've put it in your handouts, so you've got it on one of those sheets so that you can find it, but you will find that. You'll find the historical county boundaries. You'll find all kinds of things and the chronologies that can help you get closer. Maybe you want to at that point then, if you're new to the state, maybe you want to read Montana history or whatever, but get yourself closer. You can look at state data. It's really easy. You can, this is just something that I downloaded from that page so that you can see what's there. They even do this separate thing up at the top that says Dakota Territory. That's a bonus for you. You can look at consolidated chronologies, combining all the county events into a single composite entry. Now that's been really good for me where I'm looking for the Ferndale community and the county line runs down the center of the road. I have Flathead County on one side and Lake County on the other. So you can look at things like I've put up Beaverhead County, Montana here. I just selected one. But I put up Beaverhead County because you can look at that and say, okay, they tell you how Beaverhead lost some land to Madison County in 1869, and it gives you the proof right there. Isn't that spectacular? You don't even have to go look for that stuff. You can cut and paste it. Of course, they have bibliographies and sources there, but let's go on. You can go to, my other favorite thing is my homestead timeline. You can go out to glowrecords.blm.gov and go into the reference center there and get a 4-page document on all different kinds of homesteads so you can find out what kind of homestead your family had. My grandpa Lee, first of all, had a regular original homestead entry homestead. He got to amend that a few years later into a range stock type of homestead because the land was not suitable for cultivation. So we got to amend that, but I still got all of the great information in his file from the National Archives. This one is a really great site. It even has a mapping technique, although part of that is down right now, but it's going to be back up. Timelines for women's rights. You can go look at a myriad of these. Why are they so important? Because it isn't just women's rights. It also clarifies what was happening across the country in terms of laws for both men and women. So you might want to look at some of those. If you want to get extremely legal, then you want to go to the Legal History of Women site. If you want to know about women's rights, you can go to NARA. If you want to know about milestones in a family, that's different again. What I'm saying is every one of these are slightly different. They'll still give you the context. They'll still do things in common, events in common, but they may show you a different point of view. You can do things like a steamboat, canal, transportation, timelines. They're out there. They're very important. When you have somebody like my husband's cousin who insisted that the family had to have come from North Dakota in a buckboard, it is really incumbent to show him that they actually had train tickets. Yeah, from North Dakota. They rode the train and they rode right into Harlowton, Montana, because until then, they just don't believe it. So you can find things. How did they use steamboats and canals early on? It's important for you to know. It will broaden your information pool greatly. There's more. There's religion timelines. I've given you that today. The major events in the 21st century timeline. You can see where that is at History Central. Because we don't think that we're making history today, but we are. And those things are being added constantly. So you can get down to the minutia if you want to. I don't. I just want to get the bigger things. U.S. historical timelines at my favoriteest place of all, e-reference desk. If you haven't done reference desk and you don't have that pulled up as one of the main things on your page, you need to, because you can go anywhere and do anything. It is a fantastic place. It's called Reference Desk. And this part for the historical timelines is the ereferencedesk.com. And then, of course, Cindy's list, which again is free, gives you 82 types of timelines. And guess what? A lot of them have hot links. Wowza. So I'm just showing you a few here that she's got. But you can go out, you can look at a Holocaust timeline. You can look at an Oregon Trail timeline in two different aspects or two different ways. Timeline of the Great Depression, which I've used with my family, because my family was numb during the Great Depression. They just lived. That's what they did. They all stayed together and they lived. So that's my program today. If I can find my thing.